Good evening, everyone. I'm just checking to make sure my sound and audio is good.
Hello.
Hi, Jill. Good?
Yep.
So it is 6:30. We have Brian, Pearl. Let me, I have not heard from Matt or Daphne. Let me just double check real quick and maybe just give them another minute and then we can get started. Okay, I see Daphne and I have a text into Matt to see if he's coming. Why don't we go ahead and just get started if everybody's okay? So good evening, everyone. Today is March 24th, 2021. It is 6:32 p.m. and I'd like to call the Student Learning Achievement / COVID committee to order. Tonight we have from the board, Mrs. Pickle-Antonio, Mr. Hairston, Mrs. Mooring, and me, myself, Mrs. Chrysler. Just as far as participants that we also have joining us tonight on the panel are members of our COVID task force. I just want to remind you that we are on YouTube Live, and so we can see what everybody's doing and what's happening in your house right now or wherever you're logging in from. So just be mindful of that, and then also to just remember to turn your microphones on mute unless you are speaking during the presentation, or unmute if you have any questions or things like that. With that, I will turn it over to the administration to go ahead and give an update on the meetings of the task force and kind of where we are moving forward.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks.
Okay, so I am going to, let's see, go ahead and share my screen. Matt, if you're there, it's not allowing me to share my screen. Let's see here. Let me check. Sue, will you try to share? I know you have the presentation as well.
Sure, I'll try. I am on a single screen, so that'll be new for me, but let me try. It says host participant is disabled. Just share screen.
I'm checking with Matt. There we go. Now we're good. Thank you, Matt. Okay. So thank you all for joining us this evening. We are going to give a district update on all things COVID and our all-in return. As our community knows, we did start back with a full return in the buildings on March 15th. And as of today, we've officially completed 8 days of our all-in model, and things are going very well. Our students and staff are very excited to be back. That first day was just amazing. They were so excited to walk through those doors. Mr. Barrett and I both had a chance to get out to our buildings on that first day and a couple times since, and just over and over again, we heard how excited the kids were to be seeing their friends and back together again with their the other hybrid group that they hadn't been seeing in person. Our teachers have so much energy. There's just, the only way to describe it is that the energy is definitely contagious. We know that transportation has been a pain point in several of our school locations. We are very grateful to the families that have been able to transport their students so that we could manage our busing needs and, make this transition to all-in work. Things are settling in most locations. The traffic patterns are kind of being worked out, but certainly just want to extend a huge appreciation for everyone's continued patience at drop-off and pickup times. We continue to make improvements, but we do know that as we, work through the rest of the year, that's something that, we'll continue to navigate and work through. As expected, in our last presentation, I referenced that, there is a chance we could see increases in quarantines. And as expected, we have seen an increase. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later tonight. But overall, it's just been a very positive transition. Families, parents are excited, kids are excited, teachers are excited. And we're just thrilled to have, as much all-in time as we possibly can this year. The last time we presented to the community, we highlighted some of the data points that we regularly get updates from in our weekly meetings with Franklin County Public Health and Columbus Public Health. And so this slide highlights some of the data that we just received yesterday. The cases have decreased, the cases in the area have decreased by 7.8%. Our cases per capita are down to 164 cases per 100,000, and that's a decrease. The last time the task force touched base, it was at 184, and so we saw a downward trend there. Our positivity rate is down as well to 3.5%, and previously we were at 4.6 the last time we discussed. And then this last box here shows that 7 out of the last 8 weeks have had decreases. So that is definitely positive news. We continue to trend in the right direction with this virus. I do want to highlight a note at the bottom. The governor had announced several days back that at 50 cases per 100,000, it was anticipated that all public health orders would be lifted. And so that's something we continue to monitor and keep an eye on for sure. And we'll, definitely be looking at, when we get to that point, what that means for our schools and our health and safety measures. So earlier in the year, the task force identified data points that we were going to be looking at to prompt conversations about learning model changes when we were in hybrid to possibly needing to go back to distance learning. Well, we're past that point right now, and we certainly have the all-in model in full force, but the task force continues to monitor those data points and keep them at the forefront as, metrics that would prompt conversations for a possible learning model change from our current model. So we are continuing to look at school spread evidence within our district. We are continuing to monitor substitute fill rates. And you can see there, school spread wise, we are watching for a point when we may get to greater than 25 across the district. And then the substitute fill rate would be less than 75% for 5 consecutive days. So those are kind of the district specific thresholds that have been set. And then if you look at the right side here, we've identified data points that we are continuing to monitor related to student and staff absences. And those are absences that are COVID related. And so we will look at those both from a district level and then at individual building levels as well, monitoring for greater than 10% of our student absences connected to COVID for 3 consecutive days, and staff absences greater than 5% for 3 consecutive days. And so the next few slides show our district data the past 3 weeks on these data points. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at those. So this first slide shows our COVID-related student absences, and we have this top bar set at 10%. That's kind of that threshold I just went over on the last slide. And so you can see that we are doing really well with this data point. I think we only had 1 or 2 days here. These are our highest days that we were at or really close to 2%. So definitely a positive data point for us. This next slide, again, a 3-week view, shows our staff absences related to COVID. And this is one we had set that 5% threshold at, and, very, very low, below 1%. So again, this is really positive for us to be seeing. This next slide highlights this idea of possible school spread. And, we've talked before about the amazing job that our nursing staff, directed by Sue Wigging, have been doing for us. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that happens on a daily basis with all of our COVID tracking. And so one of the things that they are able to do is take a look at our positive cases, what the close contact data looks like. And even though we can't be certain that a particular positive case would be the cause for this particular spread, but we have identified that since January 5th, we have 2 possible positive cases related to school spread. So still a very low data point for us, and that is looking very good. This next data point is our substitute fill rate, and we are looking to be, certainly we want to be as close to 100% always, but the threshold set would be lower than 75% for 5 consecutive days. And so this is looking really positive for us as well. Over the last 3 weeks, we did have a couple days here where we were lower, and those certainly are tough days in our district. Our teachers and our support staff really pitch in, and it's all hands on deck to help with coverage. But by and large, our substitute fill rates have been high for us. So this next slide is a graph that we took a look at as a task force most recently, just monitoring what the staff and student positive cases and quarantine cases are looking like. And so this shows a 3-week glance. Of course, this section here is since our all-in return. So you can see that we have had that increase that was mentioned before. We are going to talk in just a second. I'm going to ask Sue Wigging to, go over what those quarantines might look like and what the ideas are behind a full quarantine or a modified quarantine. One of the things that was pointed out from the task force was that you can see that once the staff vaccines have set in, we have, we have low positive cases and low quarantines among our staff. So that's been a really positive thing for us as well, and certainly contributes to the staff absence data that we previously looked at. Okay, so I am going to ask Sue Wagging to unmute herself and just help to give an explanation of this concept of full quarantine versus modified quarantine.
Can I interject before she?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Before she presents, I was just wondering what kind of, like, the preparations and everything that we have in place. How does that come into play? What we're doing right now with, like, the variant backdrop, as far as like the B117, I mean, how is that fitting into what, we're doing right now? Because, it's becoming more prevalent within the United States. So I'm just saying, that is that considered in your preparations and things of that nature, or we haven't addressed it yet because we haven't seen it yet? So.
Well, definitely on our calls the last few weeks, the health departments have, identified that, there are variants in Ohio, and those are things that they continue to monitor. And certainly we want to be, watching them very closely. As far as our preparation goes, Brian, and certainly, Sue, jump in, Steve, jump in. We're maintaining our health and safety protocols as they're outlined, to continue the mask wearing, working on that social distancing at 3 feet to the greatest extent possible, and lots of hand hygiene. So, our protocols are still really wrapping in those mitigation strategies that the health department has been, encouraging since the beginning. But we haven't had, many changes specific to the variant or the possible, surfacing of the variant here.
Yeah, Brian. So the B117, the British variant's in 49 states, I think, and in some places it's 30 to 50% of the new cases. That hasn't necessarily been the case here, but every public health call, we usually have a call on Tuesdays. They talk about that and the concern, but the last few meetings that we've had, the news has been very positive in terms of the decline in cases that one of the first slides Jill went over. And so they're very mindful of it. If it, starts to make traction, there's about 8 other variants. The other ones you've heard about, South African one, the Brazilian one, there's a new one in California. So I think, we're very mindful of that. And the public health officials will be on high alert to let us know if that becomes a big concern in our area.
Thanks, Steve.
If I could step in for a moment, I'm not aware that there are any, the CDC, I don't believe has issued, even though it's more virulent, I don't believe the CDC has issued any different guidelines than what is already out there. So what we're following is what they've said, but I do know it's more contagious, so that could change, but I don't believe there's been any change.
Thank you, Janet. Okay,
Okay,
Sue.
so I'm happy to share a little bit about the different levels of quarantine that we're implementing in Gahanna schools. So fortunately, we do have the option of the modified quarantine available for us to use when a close contact occurred in a classroom setting. And we're able to use the modified if we're able to maintain a minimum of 3 feet of social distancing as the standard within a school building. And the students can continue to come to school if they're a close contact to a positive case at school. We continue, as we always have, to follow the full quarantine guidelines, meaning a student has had a close contact outside of school, possibly at childcare, at church, within the family, or even in athletics right now. The individual themselves has symptoms or the individual themselves is positive, they are not eligible to attend school under those conditions, and they would have the quarantine from athletics and from the school setting. What's a little tricky is that the modified quarantine is primarily for those instances where a student is a close contact within the school, but sometimes when there's a close contact in the school, we do have to implement a full quarantine if we find that we're unable to maintain a minimum of 3 feet throughout the school day or through transportation. So our nurses, the 4 of them, look at each individual case every time we have a situation and make a determination, given the guidance that we have, as to whether a student needs to quarantine or not. And sometimes students who have, or staff who have symptoms early on in the day, that situation changes. And so they fall off of a full quarantine and they're able to come back to school under no restrictions or no quarantine if they are identified with a negative case and an alternative diagnosis. And just watching the data today, it kept our staff very busy today, given that allowance. We had, I believe, 13 to 14 students who today at some point had symptoms, but then later in the day received either an alternate diagnosis and or a negative test result. And so they were originally on our full quarantine list, and then we did not count them in our final numbers. So it can change very, very quickly, and the circumstance of an individual's case changes very quickly as well as to whether they are eligible for a full or modified quarantine.
Thank you, Sue.
Mm-hmm.
I got a question for Sue also. As far as like we're going to go into spring break, what kind of measures are going to be taken upon the return of the students? Because you're looking at a 5-day period where meeting with families and things of that nature. Is it just status quo, or are going to be additional measures taken?
So I can speak to what we will do related to making sure that we open communication with families during spring break. We have identified a new dedicated COVID reporting phone number that will be monitored throughout spring break so that our school nurses can still enjoy their spring break and we can still collect the information from our families related to any positive cases that occur and may require a quarantine upon return from spring break. Anybody that has symptoms, we can talk through with them the number of days they need to be out, and also if they happen to be a close contact with anybody during spring break, we can do the quarantine dates for athletics and for school. We'll also be maintaining our spreadsheet. We'll be looking back to see if there's a possibility of any contact during school that led to that positive case over spring break. So that data will continue to be analyzed and collected. And then, Steve, I don't know if you want to speak to potential other measures that we might be looking into.
I think we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation, but there's possibility that we will be able to give families that maybe go out of town an opportunity to take an antigen test, which is 15 minutes. They'll know if it's a positive case, and they can report it to us. So we'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the presentation, but that's another measure, Brian, that we're considering.
Well, I know that it may be shocking because typically our presentations are very lengthy, but we are actually at our last slide in the presentation. And so this one highlights student vaccinations, and as Steve started to mention, the antigen testing. So we do have approvals for individuals in the age range of 16 to 18 to be receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. And so currently, Mr. Barrett and I have been working with the local health departments and other Central Ohio school districts to plan either site-based or regionally hosted clinics that students would be able to go and receive the vaccine. And then the other side to that is the antigen test. And we do currently have 200 in the district and are kind of processing the distribution plan for that. So Mr. Barrett, I don't know if you want to talk any more about that. I know details are still being ironed out, but we were thinking the spring break piece.
Yeah, so we've ordered more of these. And so locally, Upper Arlington kind of piloted this. They had their spring break this week. And so they allowed families to pick these up at certain locations. And they had, quite a bit of interest. And I think that might be a good way that families can, test themselves, report to us, and so that they wouldn't go back in the school building if they're positive. So we're considering this idea. We're putting plans together to do that. And the pickup, if we go ahead with it, will be sometime next week. It's going to depend on how many we can get. And we think we can pick up some more on tomorrow, Thursday.
And so, Mr. Barrett, that information will likely be shared Friday in your COVID update. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of our presentation for today. As I said, it was a little shorter than typical, but certainly want to open it up for questions from anyone here within the call that we might be able to address.
So, Brian, I know you've been asking some questions. Any other questions you want to ask?
No, I'm good.
Burl, any questions? Task force members who are on the phone. Oh, I'm sorry, Daphne. Mrs. Moore, any questions?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Any task force members have any questions? Okay, I have two, and one of them is going to put you at a little bit of a disadvantage. And I don't necessarily expect an answer to one of them tonight, but just maybe we might need to have a strategy for how we might want to answer that and communicate information. But one of the things we talked about at the task force meeting today, and I think we hit on it a little bit with the slides with respect to how the quarantines are being issued, is, you know, there does seem to be some, I received a few complaints from parents whose kids were put on quarantine because they were part of a list from somebody, and they were claiming they weren't necessarily, either they didn't meet the criteria, but yet because they were on the list, you know, I think that determination is up to the county. And I think Sue did a good job at the task force today, just talking about the fact that we're not investigating these things. We're just going off of, like, based off of what people say. Do you want to describe that a little bit, and maybe potentially where that's even heading with some of the new guidance?
You're on mute, Sue.
Thank you, Jill. That is tricky. And I will share with you that it is hard for us to have that conversation with a family when they are pretty adamant that their child has not been in a situation where they might be a close contact. But as you mentioned, like, we are trying to do the best we can with the information that's provided to us. So we do consult regularly with our contacts at Franklin County Public Health. We're informed by either a family or by Franklin County of a positive case, and we quarantine clearly that positive case following the guidance that we have. And then we also quarantine any reported or known close contacts. And we don't go out looking for them. We don't even ask, could you tell us who might have been a close contact to your child? And there have been, it has not been a lot, but there have been situations where we've had a conversation with a family, and they're quite certain that their child has not been in a situation where they're a close contact. And we understand that's frustrating. There have been times we followed up with Franklin County and asked for guidance or recommendation, and we follow their lead. To be honest with you, we don't contradict information that's being provided to us or go into a research investigation mode. And so fortunately, we are aware that at the top of Franklin County Public Health's website today, there was an announcement that a quarantine period may be reduced from our current 10 days from in school and 14 days from athletics. After a certain number of days of being in quarantine, we could use a negative test to get them back to school early. So we hope to see that being implemented very soon within our district. We're not quite there yet. It was literally in writing today, and we need to update our information and our process this week to get that in order. So that is good news in case a family or a student is in that situation, to get them back to school a little bit earlier.
That was a great answer. I appreciate that. And I think maybe with some of those that updated guidance, that might be helpful too, I think, in those circumstances. The question, so this is now the unfair question, which is, sorry, we didn't think about this ahead of time, but probably should have. There's a lot of questions around state testing, enrichment at the high school, things like that. I know we're not prepared tonight to answer those because we didn't talk about them today at task force, but I think we do probably need to think about how we can, I guess any answers that we might have, we should share tonight. But if we don't, maybe think about how we can communicate that in one of the Friday emails to parents, or, and because we won't meet again until the end of April. So it's already going to be several weeks. maybe at a board meeting in between, I don't know.
So Jennifer, I know you mentioned state testing and enrichment at the high school. Can you give us a little more specifics around like what the questions are related to those?
I can.
Okay.
If that's helpful, Mrs. Chrysler, I can. So I actually raised it to Mrs. Chrysler before the meeting. I should have thought about it earlier, but since this is a student learning and achievement and COVID task force meeting, since this was such a brief update from COVID task force, I thought we might, if you're able to, I thought we might be able to also just kind of briefly touch on updates that we have with regard to what state testing is going to look like. And I partly mean that in relationship to COVID, but I also just mean in general this year, state testing is going to look a little bit different. And then if there is anything that you want to share, I mean, I know that as board members, we've fielded lots of parents' questions about the enrichment opportunities and some of the other changes that were made at the high school. So I'm certain you have as well. And again, if you don't want to get into a whole lot of detail about it now, we could also talk about it, like Jennifer said, at the next board meeting. But while we're here, and since this was a short meeting, I thought it might.
Oh. Yeah, absolutely. So we can give updates and the information we have now, and then if that doesn't seem sufficient, then we can certainly add to it. So state testing is going to be taking place. We did receive an extension on some of the testing windows, and so we are certainly taking advantage of that because we don't love to throw our kids into a testing situation the very first week back from spring break. And so we have been able to adjust our testing windows and capitalize on those extensions we've been given. At this point in time, we have outlined our testing calendars, and if they haven't already been shared from the building principals, they will be coming out very soon. We do also, we don't have an option to test remotely. And so testing in person is a requirement from the state because they are secure test materials. And so we are also communicating with our distance learning families about how they are able to take part in those tests. Certainly, we are working to provide all the information families need to make those decisions, but certainly if there are safety concerns, that is not something that families would be forced to bring their student in for, and families can talk with their building principals about that to kind of talk through next steps. We do have some relief from House Bill 67 related to the American History test. And we have had discussions about whether or not it is right to not give the test or give the test. And we honestly have landed on it is best for us to give the test, because currently it is a course that often our sophomores take, and they don't have graduation flexibility the way our 11th and 12th graders do. We do have the flexibility to substitute course grades for 11th and 12th graders. And so that is something that we certainly will be taking advantage of. But as far as the American History test, we are going to go ahead and give that, because not only do we not have the graduation flexibility for our 9th and 10th graders, we also have the seals that our students now have to work toward. And we have a citizenship seal that includes, test scores from the American History test. So, it sounds really great to be able to take a test off the plate. And that was our initial reaction. If we can get rid of a test, let's get rid of a test. But when we really sat down to process the pros and cons of it, it certainly was more beneficial to go ahead and keep it on the schedule. So we will have all testing wrapped up by the end of April. And certainly it looks different at different levels because of the number of assessments that are given. For the kids, even though we don't love that we have to be using some of our school days for the testing, it will feel kind of normal to them if they've been in that testing situation before, just as far as how we operate things and the part 1, part 2, those types of things. So, will be, I guess the main difference is they'll be testing with masks on this year. and we will do our best to make it as low stress as possible for our kids, because that's definitely not something we want to add to their anxiety at this point. So is that okay for testing update?
That was fantastic.
Also, Jill mentioned House Bill 67, and we are going to use that to allow for reducing our standards to the state minimum standards, so students can have every benefit of the doubt to graduate. We've been hearing from a lot of parents that students are under a lot of stress, anxiety, isolation, from special ed all the way up to gifted. It's been very, very trying, and it's really important that we take advantage of the flexibility that the law provided. I think the governor signed it last Saturday. So we'll be putting a resolution on our agenda on April 15th to, that's very short. It's one page, but it's just, taking advantage of House Bill 67.
That's great. That's a great update. And I mean, this is just my personal opinion, but I'm interested in the testing just to measure. We don't really know what this year has done with respect to the kids and to just kind of see where we are, right? So we can kind of benchmark where we need to go, right? And so I think that's going to be interesting, but I appreciate the low stress part of it too.
Sure. I can say, I don't have the data in front of me. I don't have it pulled, but when we administered the fall state test to third graders, we did definitely see a decrease from what we typically have in the fall. Now, certainly that's an end of year test given in the beginning of the year, so that students have an extra opportunity. And we know that the third grade reading guarantee retention, requirements have been modified, but I will say that is one data point we do have for sure that shows, some decrease. But we are also having some conversations related to our learning loss plan and a data tool that we, have been needing in the district for quite some time, to be honest, a universal screener, just to help us get some consistent data across all of our grade levels. So that's something else in addition to state testing that we'll be able to look at as well.
I mean, parents should be I think that's good news, right? To hear that you're already working on learning loss plans and what that means moving forward. I mean, because it could look different building by building, student by student, class by class. And so the fact that you're already proactively thinking about those things is something that it's really appreciated. And I hope that it resonates with our parents and families.
You want me to give a little more of an update on that learning loss plan? I know that was something we had talked about maybe discussing. I don't have all the final details, certainly, but definitely Jennifer and Burl and Daphne and Brian, our heads are already working around, learning loss plans and really being able to gather some data and look at where the gaps truly are. We will be running our traditional summer school program. And that's something that in a recent survey, our staff definitely felt that was something we needed to maintain. So we're looking at that. We also are going to be running some experiential based, more interactive type of activities for families. And, we're working to partner with outside organizations. We've made contacts with a lot of partners, Parks and Rec, the Gahanna Library, the Ohio Historical Society, all other partners, just to kind of look at different options that we will have. And, we are looking for this to be a free experience. However, one of the things that puts kind of some constraints around it is, our ability to accommodate a certain number of students based on staff and personnel that we have to run and operate the session. So that's something we're still working through, but we definitely are going to have some of the more traditional intervention models, as well as some, high interest experiential opportunities for students. And then certainly it will carry into next year once we have those additional data points and taking a look at how we can work with teachers to identify what are the standards they were able to get to, and what does mastery look like, and then what are the standards they weren't able to get to completely, and how do we kind of bridge those gaps within the regular classroom, and then identify students that might need additional support through small groups, additional supplemental support, or even ongoing after school tutoring type of opportunities starting in the fall. So those are all the things that are kind of in the works right now. It's a very busy time.
That's fantastic. That is a tremendous amount of work given all the other stuff that's going on with respect to the pandemic, and it just very thoughtful, and I think very much to anticipate those needs instead of try to play catch up, I think is critical. And so definitely thank you for that hard work, and I commend you for that. Any questions about that from any board members? I don't see any hands. Sorry, I'm scanning as I talk. I don't see any hands. And then maybe just even a kind of a explanation. I mean, I know that parents received correspondence from Mrs. Williams with respect to the high school enrichment time. Anything you want to share with respect to that?
Mr. Barrett, do you want to do this one? I know you've had a lot of recent conversations related to it, and then I'll fill in gaps.
Yeah, I think, this schedule was really developed to support the number of students that really all of our students, whether it's they've needed classroom support to get caught up because we had, 4 times the number of failures we would normally have at this time of year, but also enrichment activities to allow students to do some things that they enjoy, have, a mental health break, to be able to visit with their friends. So, one enrichment activity that comes to mind is Cindy Maciosi's HD musical theater class that students can take advantage of. But there's many more. But students have fallen behind, and they have work that they didn't do from the second and third quarter. And many teachers are allowing them to make up that work. They're getting support in a supportive study hall with teachers in subject areas where they've fallen behind. And we think it's really important to give them all the help they can get so that they can, earn the credits that they need to graduate, whether they're a sophomore, a junior, or a senior. And so I think there has been some parents that have reached out to us that feel that the enrichment part has fallen short. So what we've tried to do is allow students to do things like Apex learning. Many students take, for instance, health in the summer. So they're taking health and Apex learning. We still have some parents that feel the enrichment part of it has fallen short. And Jessica Williams, the other Jessica Williams, our principal at the high school, has been meeting with them and talking with them. And I think it's just a difficult thing to make sure that everyone has what they need, and the high school staff and principals are really trying to do that. But it is alarming how many kids have fallen behind, and the angst and the anxiety and the isolation. And I'm probably hearing more from gifted parents than I am other parents that whose kids have fallen behind. It's just, great kids, great students who were very motivated and very driven to get their work done are struggling to complete basic assignments. And it's just it's really, a function of being in this pandemic for a year, being in and out of school, having so many different things to adjust and adapt to. I think grace and compassion is really what we're trying to, navigate with, so that we can finish the year and help these students kind of get back on their feet academically.
I think I would just add, I don't need to remind everyone, but this pandemic has been filled with a lot of really, difficult and sometimes controversial decisions and choices. And, this is certainly one that, we kind of have parents all over the board on, students all over the board on, staff all over the board on, although more staff were in support of, this change. I think ultimately Mrs. Williams and her team were really just taking a look at the data in front of them, the needs that have surfaced, and, trying to come up with, a non-traditional way to be able to support all students. And, that's kind of what the goal of the schedule change was.
Yeah, and I think that you have to start somewhere, right? I mean, I guess that's part of what we have to figure out, as part of coming of the students that are hybrid students coming back to all in, I mean, part of that is starting somewhere and trying to figure out then what is working and what doesn't, and then where to go from here, with respect to not just students who are struggling academically, but also the mental, social and emotional issues, I think are something that it's a little hard to put numbers to that sometimes. I think we've done a great job with respect to the, guidance counselor visits and the data that we looked at the last meeting, but sometimes that's a little bit hard to quantify on a regular basis. So you got to start somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Any questions from board members about any of that information? Okay. Any other comments or questions from task force members or board members?
And I just say thank you. I appreciate, I know, like I said, that wasn't something that we had talked about ahead of time, but as I was thinking about this meeting, and especially in relationship to the last COVID community meeting that we had, where we talked about some of the mental health data and some of the issues, it felt like it was a natural thing to bring. I apologize for not
No problem.
bringing it up earlier, but I appreciate the update.
Mhm.
I just want to thank our task force for its guidance and its help in helping us kind of think through different options and our plans, and just being there in their expertise in the medical field has been very, very helpful and reassuring to us. And our first event was a field trip to the buildings, and got to see that kids were wearing their masks and that we were following our protocols. And here we are back in school. And I'm not so sure any of us thought that would be possible even this year. And so it's just I could tell you Monday, March 15th was a pretty cathartic day for all of us. It was just so great to see. So thanks for all you've done to help us get to this point.
Thank you, Steve. And I mean, I echo those sentiments, and I think I can speak on behalf of the board when I say that we all do appreciate it. We had a really great task force meeting this morning, today at noon, and we had just such a robust discussion about the data and the numbers. And so, I just personally walked away from that meeting just feeling so unbelievably blessed and lucky that we have people in the community that are willing to step up and share their expertise and really talk out these issues that help us understand it a little bit more and help us, move forward and make policy decisions. And it's not lost on us as well, the hard work that the administration has done to, get us to this point, collect that data, the work that the teachers are doing, which is just phenomenal. Both the continued work that all distance teachers have done to engage students throughout the year in creative ways, which is extremely difficult, right? To have that connection on a regular basis through a screen like this. And I've actually just recently was stopped by a parent whose child is distance learning and struggling a little bit with the fact that they're not having those social connections, but just so thankful for the work that the teacher has done to connect the people in the class together in creative ways and create pods and opportunities. So just fantastic work there. And then again, I would be remiss beyond, and the work that the teachers have done, I think, to get the kids safely back in the classroom, the transportation piece of it. I know we're still struggling to figure out some of those issues, but we're working through them, and I think there's solutions that are unfolding. And then our nursing staff, again, is just killing it, right? I mean, just to not only deal with what they have to do now on a daily basis with students being in the building full time, but also then to continue with the COVID tracing, contact tracing and discussions and all of the work that they're doing. So it's really a team effort, and it's amazing to see the school community come together in this way.
Ms. Chrysler, can I just interrupt for 1 second? I thank the nurses so much, but I also just want to shout out to the clinic aides and to the school secretaries. They have been an enormous help in this, and such team players, and they have learned and applied so much, so many times, and been so flexible, the protocols and the algorithms. And so again, the nursing staff, the clinic aides, the school secretaries, they have been one big team who have really taken the lead in the buildings in collaboration with the principals, and have just been a godsend for all of this to be done.
Well said. I appreciate that input. Thank you for that. Because that's very important. We certainly don't want to leave anybody out. And it really is, I think, this school community that has come together in the entire school community that's come together in such a phenomenal way. So,
Yeah.
Oh, Mrs. Abby.
I had a question. I'm so glad I was able to attend and hear the enrichment part. So my head was going also because I wondered with how much the COVID was going to impact. With the high kids who are failing, have we teased out if that is more likely to be online learner versus hybrid now in person? Have we looked at that difference? And then when we get the test scores, will we know again, are those who are behind, so that we know maybe we need to offer up? And I'm thinking if next year we have to offer an online option again, not knowing where the variants are and what that is at. So if that would be structured different. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to ask that question, but my mind was going and I have to ask or I won't remember.
So I will say, I know that Mrs. Williams and her team have really dissected the data to take a look at, to the best of their ability, the reasons for the failures and, the best support to be giving in those intervention and study hall support times. I think as far as the test scores go, Janet, we don't actually get the state test scores back until next fall. And so, it's really, those are tough data points for us to use at this point. We, as I mentioned before, we are looking to bring in a universal screener that will hopefully provide us with some more information about that. But the data we looked at related to that we had shared related to the failures, we were looking at all of our students. And so, kind of breaking it down by the distance learners as opposed to those that had been in person through hybrid and are now likely in person all in. I don't know the specific data breakdown on that. So.
I think that would be important information to tease out for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think as a non-educator, but I think that would be really important for the school board to know just who needs that extra support, if it is. And it might be one in the high school, it might be one group, but in the middle school, it might be, it might be the opposite. But I do think knowing where that support is going to need would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would love to have that information.
Yeah. Yeah, we will certainly analyze that data. I think we're hearing that it's really across the board. And we're also hearing, curiously enough, that, we have a measure called Lexia that the scores aren't that down in elementary reading. So we're going to have to kind of really kind of analyze the data and figure out, what are we going to keep, what worked during the pandemic and what do we never want to visit again, right? And so I think it's really important, we had a discussion today about, a model that would foster online learning. And we think the best online learning that is happening is the online teaching that's happening with our teachers, where they're planning the lesson, they're using our Gahanna teacher, Gahanna curriculum, and trying to turn that around for next year to have that in place and hire staff, and might be difficult. We've talked with our curriculum team about it. We may be able to have some option next year, but we really want to plan it right and have the time to kind of do online learning where it is, a teacher that's face to face, even if it's online with kids, and not just an algorithmic program. So we're going to need a lot of time to kind of plan that out. But our curriculum team is diving in to work on it, and it may be hard to get in place for next year. We've had some discussions about that, but certainly, an option or two of, we already have Apex Learning, we have schools PLP. We're looking at everything, but I think what is striking is, all different ability levels, there's struggle, and that we know for sure. Disaggregating that and digging down and figuring out, who needs support beyond this year is the work that Jill talked about earlier. And that's ongoing. And our plan is due to the governor's office by April 1st. And the district is working with other districts in what's called the Bridge program, where we're looking at the commonalities in this experience. So there's a lot of work going on in regard to this, but it's daunting. The challenges ahead are definitely daunting.
That was well said. Yeah, very well explained. Thank you for that question, Mrs. Zabby. I know there's one or two things I would definitely not like to repeat from the pandemic here. When you mention a couple of things you don't want to repeat, I can at least name two. Okay, so with that being said, any other questions? This has been a fantastic conversation, and one that I think was a little unexpected because of your gracious responses, I think, and some of our additional questions that we didn't are related, but we didn't necessarily have on the agenda. Any other questions from board members or task force members? Okay. Any other comments from members of the administration?
Nope.
Just want to thank our teachers, our principals, our support staff, everyone, our nurses, aides, clinic, everybody, our bus drivers. We had a visit with them this morning. Everybody's pitching in and everybody's excited to see our kids in school, and everybody wants so desperately to keep them in school throughout the rest of the year. So if there are people listening on YouTube, we hope that you play it safe during spring break, and that even if you go to a place where there isn't a mask mandate, that you wear a mask and that you come back and do your part so our kids can stay in school for the rest of the year. So thanks very much.
I think we end on that. So it's 7:24 and this meeting is officially over. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Good night. Good night. Thanks.